Bert! Get him! Yeah! Ron Bain was right.
I'm feeling spry.
Hello, everybody. This is Ron's daughter, Jessie Holden, his social media manager, and I am in charge of the intro today because Ron is out of town. Oh, it feels weird to call him Ron. My dad is out of town, and so I get to cover the intro. I'm going to spare you the 10 to 12 minutes of ads. I am going to, of course, thank all of our sponsors, but first, I really want to say thank you to any past and current, possibly future Patreon members. I am so appreciative of you. You've made my dad's dream a possibility. If you want to join the Patreon community, you can join anytime. Links are in the descriptions below, and you get some Zoom room time with a lot of great people. There's bonus content and bonus podcast episodes under the HDP Talk tier. We try to add new videos and content there as often as we can. If there's ever something you're looking for, just reach out. But let's move on to thank our other sponsors. We've got Onyx Maps, Pike Gear, Boss Shot Shells, Waltons, Gunner Kennels, Garmin, W Hunting Supply, Four Wheel Camper, Mossberg, Purina Pro Plan, Canine Athlete, Gumleaf, and of course, we want to remind you of the Upland Institute, which is the online pointing dog training courses that are collaborated between Justin McGrail and my dad, Ron Bain. It's a great time of the year to start doing that as the season is approaching. And whether you have a new or old dog, there's always something you can learn. So be sure to check that out. Like I said, links are all below. And last but not least, my dad is doing more video content. I'm very excited to help him build up this YouTube page. Thank you to all the new subscribers there. We are really looking forward to jumping more into video content, and I get to work more with my dad. So thank you all for that opportunity, and enjoy this episode.
All right, everybody. All right, no one's going to believe this, that the Hunting Dog Podcast is going, I don't want to say to the dogs, it's going to the labs. Okay? So very, a dozen episodes maybe in 9 years. I want to give people a little backdrop. I was fortunate enough to be invited down to the Purina headquarters and the Olin Farms and a ball game with a whole bunch of people in the world of Purina, whether they're trainers or writers from magazines. Met a whole bunch of people, and this one person stood out to me while I was there, and his name is Pat Burns. So, Pat, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm great, Ron. Thank you for having me.
I think when we met, you know when you shake hands with somebody, sometimes you just make that eye contact and there's a certain smile there, and you just know the person is as happy to be there as you are, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's when I met you. I was like, oh, it's funny. You get a bunch of outgoing, let's say, A-type personality, dog trainer, people that are known to do good, really good stuff in whatever venue they've done, and they're down there. Yet when you all get in one room together, the first time you meet, there's a little bit of quiet, right? You kind of feel everybody out, but you're just like, "Hi, I'm Pat Burns," and I was like, I like that kind of attitude. But Pat, for history ways, I read up on you, and I know you from a couple of days of going to the ball game and going around with Purina. But give everybody your background.
Well, Ron, I grew up not too far from where you did. I grew up in Northwest Indiana, and that's where I started in the world of retrievers. Like so many people, I didn't grow up. My family did not grow up hunters, but I picked up the hobby in high school, and all it took is one step into the Kankakee River over the top of my waders when I realized I needed a dog. So that was when I started, and I actually I started with Chesapeake Bay Retrievers, and I got my first dog, and ran into a guy in Maryville, Indiana, Tom Felinsky, and he was part of a group of guys that trained for field trial competition, and they invited me out to come train, and I'll tell you what, when I saw what a highly trained competition retriever could do, I was hooked pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's probably like the pointing dog story, but it's usually not. We don't get hooked on the training. We get hooked on that first mysterious, that first point, right? And then something explodes out of the grass, and then you're like, oh, the first time I saw a dog point, I fell in love with pointing dogs. But you had to see, you saw performance to fall in love with it before you saw the dog, probably.
Well, I certainly saw them. I'm sure what I saw initially was a dog doing a long blind retrieve, and when I saw a dog sit on a whistle and take hand signals at the distances they were, I was blown away at what was available, what dogs could do. And I was a hunter, and I am still a hunter, and so the advantage of having a dog that you could guide to a bird or blind retrieve at 200, 300, 400 yards was an amazing feat for me, and it's certainly gotten me. I dove in with both feet, like I do with everything I do.
Well, here's a sitting in the bar smart ass comment. Okay, you got to see a wonderful version of a blind retrieve. How long did it take before you accomplished that with one of your dogs?
Wow, certainly a few years, and then I went and I was invited to go see a field trial. There was a retriever club, Michiana Retriever Club, that was in over towards Fort Wayne, Indiana, and that was the first trial I went to, and I ran some trials, probably an area, or I went and watched some trials. I bet you did some stuff if you did any dog venues at the Des Plaines Wildlife Area south of Joliet.
Sure,
and
sure.
That was one of the trial sites that I went and watched dogs work. So I was a senior in high school when I got my first dog, and I guess it was probably a year and a half, 2 years before I actually was able to, handle a dog on a reasonable blind retrieve.
Were you surrounded by, did you have the mentors real quick because of hanging out with the club, or did you get some let me see, let me back it up to when you were that age. Did you get some 1978 or 79 book on how to do it?
Well, I certainly did that initially. I mean, one of the most famous books, which I still have today, is a book called Training Your Retriever by James Lamb Free. And it was a hardbound book, and it had old time pictures in it, and I read it cover to cover. And then I picked up a book called Charles Morgan on Retrievers. So those were my first two books that I read. Charlie Morgan on Retrievers. Charlie Morgan was a famous retriever trainer, and the James Lamb Free book, which I think pretty much everybody read initially. But I was fortunate enough to be invited into a group of guys from that Chicago, Northwest Indiana area that were, as you look back in history, were an incredibly successful group of field trialers. They're the highest pointed Labrador in AKC history is a dog named River Oaks Corky. Well, and River Oaks, John Trapaz was the original owner of Corky, and he was kind of the ringleader of a group of guys that worked in the Donnelly Printing Company and oil refineries, and this was their passion and their hobby. And Corky won 2 nationals. He was national derby champion. The 1977 national amateur champion was from that area. And these guys were hard workers, and they were the guys that I started with, and they were kind enough to invite me in as a 20-year-old.
I was going to say, yeah, at that point, I would suspect we both had hair just a little over our ears, but not maybe a pony. I never had a ponytail, but it was a little mop of hair on my head. And for the older guys to take you in, maybe they were already used to it by that point after a decade of seeing us with bad haircuts. Or did you always have the clean cut, high and tight?
My hair kind of went straight up in there, so I was kind of bushy. And that was how I've been fortunate enough. My father and we don't seem to lose our hair. It just goes straight up. And so I was blessed with that. But, in our game, having somebody in the field to shoot a blank pistol and throw a marked retrieve is something that you're always looking for. So I think they saw me as fresh meat and this kid that was willing to sit out in the field and throw for their dogs. But that's how it started, and that's how we all start in the game of retrievers. And there were just a group of guys that embraced me, and I was hungry to learn, and they were kind enough to get me a good start.
And it didn't come from the familial side, from your dad. It just came from.
No, my dad. We did a lot of fishing. Well, our outdoor hobby was to go to northern Wisconsin, and I grew up a muskie fisherman. So I learned how to do a tough sport without a lot of rewards, which set me up for field trial.
That set you up for a life of dog disappointment.
Well, you're right. But then I ventured into hunting, and my dad joined us for some early upland pheasant hunting and that kind of stuff, which we used our retrievers for. And well, my dad was my biggest advocate and the one that encouraged me to pursue a life that I wanted to do, a hobby versus a desk job.
So you never took, like, now I went right into the working world too. I wasn't, let's just say I wasn't cut out for college, but your dad didn't push you for college or going to service. He just said,
oh, he did not. Our family had an insurance business, and actually it was East Gary, Indiana at the time, but it's called Lake Station now. And I, worked a little bit there out of high school, and all my buddies were going to college, and it was my plan. But well, I took a couple summers and I drove to California to learn from really the godfather of what our sport, the way our sport trains today. And my dad I jumped in an S10 pickup, and I drove across Interstate 80 and went all the way to town of Escalon, California, which was about 100 miles east of San Francisco.
So Pat, so there's this core group of hardcore, really good Labrador. I'm saying Labrador. Field trials also included Chessies, but for the most part, Labradors, right?
And there were some good golden retrievers too.
Oh, some good Goldens. Okay. But then there was another epicenter in California, or just one trainer that was, who was that person?
The gentleman's name was Rex Carr. And
Okay.
Rex Carr really changed the whole style of training in our game. There were a lot of, Cotton Purcell. We were right at his kennel. Cotton Purcell and Tommy Sorensen, who was right outside of St. Louis, we were in their backyard. They were the professionals that were competing when I started, but their technique was very different. When a problem came up, they figured out a way to deal with it. Well, what Rex did is he taught dogs to handle and sit on whistles early, and he had a whole system and a program that put a dog through a basic training regimen that taught them the solutions to problems before you had the problems. It was really a very different approach. And in that time when I first got started, there were a group of old school type trainers like the guys I started with. Mm-hmm. And then there was the Rex Carr group. And I went to the 1981 National in southern Wisconsin at Bong Recreation Area. I don't know if you've ever been to Bong, sure, but that was the site for the National Amateur. 1981, my dad and I were headed north on a fishing trip, and we spent a couple days at that National. And I saw two handlers, Judy Aycock and Delma Hazard. There were two women handlers, and their style and technique was so refined and so different. And I turned to my dad and I said, I don't know where they've been, but I'm going there. And that's when I learned about Rex Carr. And Rex was Rex never ran competition, but he taught amateurs to run their own dogs and really transform the game. And in the late 60s and up through the 70s, the amateurs that he trained went on to compete and beat professionals on a regular basis. And I realized that was the future of the game. And so that's where I went to learn.
So I think I could read between the lines, and probably the listeners can, and it would go with all dog training. There was a whole lot of use of the word no, right? And then this Rex must have been more like the guy who showed the dog how to do something, not knowed the dog into doing something. So was it a early puppy development thing, or let me back up the question, and maybe you can't answer it, but the guys that you first met in northern Illinois, northern Indiana, there was no probably e-collar uses yet, right? Not in the 60s for sure.
Well, again, not in the sick. I mean, it developed before I got started, but it was in its infant stages and a crude tool at best.
Right. So that wasn't the key tool then.
Right. We used to call them tennis shoe trainers. You run out, or if you're trying to keep a dog from running down the bank when he was supposed to be swimming, some guy jumped out from behind a bush with a buggy whip and spooked him into the water, and and there were a lot of good dogs trained and made that way. But there became a much more sophisticated approach, and the answer is yes. Rex's guideline was step one was always identify the task. Teach the behavior before you reinforce it, and never to use pressure to teach, only to reinforce what's been taught.
Right, right. And that would mean you don't even name that behavior till you see the behavior, right? I mean,
well, it all starts with just common obedience. Here, sit, and heel, and then in a retriever, there's the fetch instinct that gets enhanced through a force fetch process. And then you get them to go to at a greater distance, and that's the beginning of blind retrieves. And then you teach them to sit on a whistle, and it's a very gradual process. It starts out in your backyard. We call it yard work. Until you actually get a dog to line towards at roughly 100 yards towards a group of training dummies and stop on a whistle. And we call it baseball, where they sit on a whistle and you direct them to different destinations. And that's the beginning of the whole handling process. And we use handling today to teach a dog to do a lot of different things, not just to handle.
Wow. Yeah, I have a good frame of reference when it comes to the baseball, because when I had to get one of my pointing dogs, I had a German wire hair who qualified to make it to what in the versatile world is the championship games, right? Now, in our world, in that particular test, it was not a pass fail or a first, second, third. It was still a hunt test where more than one dog could qualify, but it was our highest level test. So I had to take this German wire hair and teach it blind retrieves across water.
Okay.
Which is funny, because we start out with these versatile dogs, or let's say the pointing dogs, because I think every dog is versatile. There's so many things you can do with a dog. But we taught them to independently search, let's just say a 5-acre lily pad duck pond, right? And we pepper it with dead ducks and dead whatever you could find, dead chucker from training, dead pheasant. And we teach these dogs to go out into the water, and boom, they're successful, right? And they come back, and we tell them to go back again without actually teaching them the back command. They're just like, wow, every time he gets excited and shoots the gun, I find another dead critter. So we worked on this for years. So we got this dog that wants to go from left bank to right bank to dead tree to cross cut, and now we got to teach him, no, I want you to go straight across a body of water. Did I have my eyes opened up?
Yeah.
To getting a dog to completely forget his other training and then go like, oh, you want me to work like one of those Labradors, just go. And believe it or not, I was very lucky. A girl who lived in Wisconsin, whose father-in-law and husband are in the dog world. They're all in the German short hair world. She cut her teeth in high school working for a lab trainer. So she had the rudimentary, I think she was probably like the thrower, and she did all that work, but got to the point where she probably did enough training to where she, over the phone with her father-in-law and me and her father-in-law living in Virginia, she got us through the baseball and over the shoulder, had the dog sits at you and goes over his left shoulder. But no, sometimes they want to go to the right shoulder, and you got to. And so I have such an appreciation for when you could get that dog to be almost so to really understand you. Like when we just cut a bird dog loose, there's no understanding. We hope his pointing instinct holds, right? Now, beyond that, we can get him steady. That's a different story. But to take that dog that, like, I would never say every Labrador loves to retrieve. I'm sure that's not the case, but they should. to get that retriever to not want to just do it his way and to do it your way? How early do you start with that? What I don't mean the complex stuff, but
No. It's all these games. You're right. A pointer is pointing because he wants to catch the bird and eat it.
right.
And it's a stalled stalk. They've learned, and then you enhance that. A retriever wants to do the same thing. He wants to go retrieve it, take it under the truck, and eat the bird. That's what their instincts are.
No.
So initially, we start to add rules to the retrieving. Now there's prey drive, and then there's a desire to chase things, whether it's a tennis ball or a training bumper, and we
Right.
try to enhance both. But early on, we teach them the first rule of retrieving is to come back with the retrieve. So we start that with little puppies. We teach them a little bit of obedience and teach them to sit, and we may be holding them with a little check cord or a tab, we call it, a little short, and throw something for them, and they run out and get it, and we encourage them to come back. We may do it in a hallway in the house so they don't have an option, but you start to gradually add rules to the process of retrieving until the rules become sitting on a whistle and taking hand signals. And, it just, each step builds upon the previous, but you start that to some degree right off the bat. One rule is when you hold the puppy and you throw the tennis ball down the hallway is you restrain him for a second, and then oftentimes most people send them on the dog's name. So you give them the permission to go chase the ball, but the early restraint is the beginning of a rule of retrieving.
Right. As opposed to just letting it run in circles around you, you're already getting him the idea like, dad'll let me know when to go. Right.
Right. And when they come back, you teach them that they get to go again. So you teach them the joy of retrieving is the joy of going and coming. And when they get to come back, you throw it again. So they learn, oh, you mean if I go out and get it, which I love to do, and I bring it back to you, you're going to throw it again. And you start that process. And we've all been to some people's houses who have, and our house is probably one of them, with the obnoxious retriever that brings a tennis ball and sticks it in your lap.
Or anything it could find.
It stares at you and wants you to throw it for him. Well, that's really kind of what happens with those puppies. You instill that desire to run out and pick it up and bring it back so you get to throw it again.
So I need a little clarification because there's hunt tests, there's water tests, there's field trials. Now, you've predominantly been in the field trial side of things, or have you dipped your toe in all the different testing?
When I started, there were no such thing as hunt tests. The world of field trials, the first Labrador field trial was in 1931.
Wow. And
so, and it was in the Hudson Valley of New York, and then it spread to across the country. Actually, Wisconsin and Minnesota have some of the oldest retriever clubs in the country. So that's really the hotbed, and Michigan wasn't far behind. But when I started, there wasn't any such thing as hunt tests. I think it was in the mid '80s when hunt tests started to happen. Well, hunt tests enabled people who didn't necessarily have the time or commitment to compete to be in a venue that encouraged them to train their dogs. And it's the whole, especially with the retriever, the whole theory and technique or story behind it was hunt with the retriever, you're going to preserve game. In other words, if you're going to go out and hunt and you wound a bird, it's your job to get it. Well, a retriever is the animal that's going to bring it back and and recover game that you've harvested. So the whole idea of that went into using a program called Hunt Test to try to identify the good hunting dogs and encourage people to train them, and the dogs that should be bred to create other good hunting dogs. So it is a pass-fail system, and it's become a hugely popular deal. The Master, and they have a national championship event, Master National Championship, and it's going to be in October in South Georgia, where I spend a big chunk of the year. And I think there's something like 1,300 dogs competing in that event. It is huge. My sport is not that big, but the hunt test is huge.
The hunt test is now, because it's maybe not the everyman's thing. Still takes dedication to be involved, especially to go to that level to Georgia but the venues are out there so much where a guy that just gets his first dog could put his toe in the water with a hunt test.
Absolutely.
But he wouldn't be ready for the field. So what's the difference in the field trial? What is it the caliber of the dogs or is it the difficulty of the test? Because I haven't seen one.
Well, it would certainly be all the above. Now a lot of hunt test dogs are from field trial breeding, and I work with a lot of hunt test people, and I cross over, and I try to be an ambassador to the sport of field trials and encourage people to dip their toes in field trials as well. But what happens in field trials is that just like every sport, the canine athlete has evolved and the training techniques have become more sophisticated and the training grounds have become even more elaborate. So, the dogs get faster, smarter, better. The distances become extreme in order to separate because you're having to come up with a winner and 4 placements out of 100 dogs on a weekend. And when you have 80 of them that are really well trained, the tasks asked them to do are above and beyond most any hunting situation you'll do. They'll retrieve up to 4 birds, anywhere from, well, sometimes they have short retrieves, but a lot of times they're 300 to 400 yards in length, and it may take 20 minutes to complete a setup. So it takes a highly trained dog with a lot of perseverance and a lot of intellect, a lot of God-given skills and talent to be that extraordinary animal. And, and if a person loves to compete, it's a great sport, and it's a very challenging sport that is very humbling. Even the best dogs are not much different than a good baseball player. If you bat 300, in other words, if you finish or complete 30% of your events, you're above average. So
that holds true with the dogs in that venue.
Absolutely, you bet. And so a lot of times you come home, with things to work on and frustrations, maybe more so than you do with ribbons and trophies on the dashboard.
Which you've come home with a few over the years. I did read your bio.
We worked very hard at it, and I was fortunate enough to be associated with some great trainers, and I worked very hard myself. I was in Central Michigan for 20 years and competed at a national level, and so we had our share of success. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I've never been a competitive person, but I think once we own a dog, we all want that dog to hit the home run, right? Like I could play a game of poker and lose. I don't gamble, so to speak, but I love playing a game of cards, and I could care less if I lose. But if my dog's with somebody else, I sure don't want him to lose. I don't want him to lose.
Well, absolutely. Let me tell you one quick story that really hit home with me, because you're a hunter, I'm a hunter. You've probably done a little bit of deer hunting. Well, I was fortunate enough a few years ago to go on a moose hunt in Alaska with some friends. And I shot a moose at 192 yards. And I know that because I had a rangefinder. And was in a little wooded area, and this moose moved a little bit and fell over, and I said, well, this is awesome. So I started walking down towards this moose, and there was cedar trees and different types of pines. And so I took an easy route. I started to move a little left and a little right. And an hour and a half later, I couldn't find this moose. And I'm going like, this is insane. It's the size of a Suburban. I cannot find a moose at a hunt. So I walked back up to that spot, and I was able to find where I took my shot. And I walked like the perfectly trained retriever, as straight as I could. I climbed over every bush, and in 10 minutes, I walked right up to the moose. And what I realized pretty quickly is the sport of field, the most, well, you've done it with birds that you've shot and your dog didn't see. Right, the best way to actually recover is to stare at the spot and walk directly to it. We spend a lot of time teaching retrievers to go straight with all kinds of things that would divert their path: water, terrain, cover, wind, all kinds of things. So a big part of our advanced training is teaching a dog to run on a straight line, because it is the most efficient way to find something you're looking for. And and I guess that became profound to me, because I laughed to myself, because I'd been doing this a long time. And I said, I expect my dogs to retrieve up to 4 different birds that they watch being thrown at distances twice as long as I shot this moose at. And I couldn't, and they're retrieving a 2.5 pound bird. And I'm looking at 1,000 pound plus animal, and I couldn't find it. And I said, how can I expect my dogs to do what they do if I didn't focus and have that degree of training and focus and concentration? So it really took on a practical application when I understood why we teach our retrievers to retrieve in the manner in which we do. And that's why the competitions are based on things that divert their route, factors and that. And then when they get lost, because they're judged on their ability to mark and go find game.
So I'm picturing on your training grounds, or wherever your training grounds are, many places, wherever you go turns into a training ground some days. You will set things up that would pull the dog away. Like, would you use the terrain of the place, or if
Absolutely.
and a dog, just let's say an untrained dog, would be like, oh, you know what? It'd be easier if I ran downhill and picked up a little speed, maybe.
Absolutely.
But now he's got to rely on, I'm not straight anymore. So
Right.
And then
we teach them to go straight, but if the dog is savvy enough to reorient and know where he is, well, then he's a really intelligent and a good marker, or an animal that can identify the spot. So it's, we, in all these sports, we're trying to find the balance between trained and natural ability. You do it in all of your bird dog, if they're too much under control, they're not using their instincts. And if they're using too much of their instincts and not in control, they're not any good either. So it's that slippery slope that we play in all of these, in all sports, whether it's human sports or canine sports.
Yeah, you got to have a coach and a plan, right?
Absolutely.
That saying, hope is not a strategy.
Exactly. And the training grounds that you see resemble a lot of almost golf courses in the way the water hazards are, your sand traps, or uneven terrain. They're just things that make it difficult for a dog to go straight. And a good judge will throw his retrieves in a place that if the dog goes to the easiest spot, he's not going to find his bird.
Gotcha. Yeah, my head's kind of swimming right now, because I've got an English Cocker, which is certainly known for retrieving and certainly can be taught the line drills and the handling, which I found I could teach to a German Wirehair too. Mm-hmm. For some reason, I'm intimidated by the fact of, like, I literally don't know how to steady her up. I don't know if I take the same approach that I took with like a whoa post and a training table. When you start whoaing a young dog, is it just the hands-on part, and do you work a verbal into it? And
yeah, I work a verbal sit. Sit, it means stay for us. It means put your butt on the ground, don't move. So yes, we definitely incorporate the sit command in, and then we restrain them with either a short leash that they can either drag out. We can also use the common thing today is using these elevated place boards. For a dog to identify that's where I need to be at, and I need to stay on that spot until I'm invited to go off the spot. So that's used in a lot of the different sporting breeds. Now, Ron, I just got back from a Springer Spaniel and English Cocker group in Central Maine. And and I've been invited for 10 years to come up and give a retriever trainer's perspective to a group of competitive Spaniel people. And we did a lot of the same things we do in retrievers with these English Cockers. We had a nice group of English Cockers, and Jim Keller from Wild Wind Kennels, you met Jim, hosted the seminar. So I'll put you, he's got some good stuff out there, and there's some educational opportunities for you to learn more about the training of Spaniels.
Yeah, the little bit I've done, I know with this particular one, I didn't, my first one only lived to be 2 years of age, just tragic little problem. But I didn't do, the one guy I went to, he said, how much did you play tennis ball fetch with this dog? I said, all the time off the wall of the building. And he said, you didn't do me any favors, because I wasn't asking anything of her other than like, I'm over on the computer and I'm throwing the ball with I made no boundaries. I made no rules, right? It was however she wanted to do it. Like literally never made her wait to go. So that was, so this one I've backed off, not much retrieving, or I mean, she retrieves when she finds something, but I haven't done much throwing retrieving. So I'd like to get this one on the right track for sure.
Well, they're a neat breed, and they're very retrieve driven typically. And we actually, I watched them working on steadying some new dogs this past week. It was very interesting.
Do you think that obviously the Springer's a little bigger than the Cocker in when they're sitting and marking? Would that be what would it be? Would that be the barrier for a distance retrieve, or could those dogs learn that those long retrieves is like a field trial retrieve?
Well, they certainly can. You're right. Their stature sometimes does restrict them. But when you go to a Cocker trial or a Springer trial, the retrieves may not be super long, but the cover's high. So their ability to identify where they're going is pretty miraculous. I think a lot of good retrievers would struggle doing some of the retrieves I've seen these Spaniels and Cockers do. And a number of people, some of the professionals that I was working with and talking to up there, actually think that some of the English Cockers are actually better markers than Springers when it comes to marking retrieves. That's
interesting. That gives me a glimmer of hope, even if it's, that in a quarter will get me a cup of coffee. I mean, not bad.
They're a very sporty, fun, stylish breed of dog, typically.
I definitely want to give Purina a plug for basically introducing us and what we went to, but there was a question I had when the last night when we were sitting in the motel lobby with that excellent service we had at the tables for drinks and hors d'oeuvres. Remember, that was just a pleasure at that airport motel. And at one point I kept hearing people say, oh, I got a good young dog. He's really showing me, like he's got it. Like this could be a winner. And I remember asking all of you, I think 3 of you, like, I kind of know what I'm looking for in a pointing dog. I wouldn't know what I'm looking for in a lab. I really, because most people's experience with labs, are most popular dog in the country are the labs that live around the lake and the labs that go on, duck hunting with no formal training, but their personality is just one of the best personality dogs there are, right? That's why it's such a popular dog. And I asked you, like, what are you looking, like, what makes the difference in a lab that can literally compete, can be that competitive athlete, as opposed to, it takes a lot to be a good hunting dog too. But what is it about a field trial, let's just say field trial lab, that doesn't mean he's going to win the big one, but that could compete on an even keel with most of its counterparts? What are you looking for in that dog?
I think you would see similar traits in a good pointing dog. I know I spent some time with good sled dogs. They have a look about them. They have a focus and an intensity that separates them from other dogs of their breed. Certainly with us, some of the early retrieves, with the dog just being so focused and driven to complete the retrieve or to get to the retrieve. Now, one of the other things is it's important for our dogs to have an off switch. If they're so driven, they're hard to manage. So having a biddable dog that has an off switch, that likes to retrieve. And the other thing, it's very helpful if they're comfortable in the water, because a lot of what we do, especially in the United States and North America, is the water retrieves are a big part of our game. So a focused dog that loves to retrieve, that is a good citizen, and just has that intense look about him, like what you see in other good athletes, whether they're human or canine. are the beginning of all that. And then you start to work and see how they respond to being trained and how naturally biddable they are with early obedience. And all that is going to be the same whether you're just making a good house dog, a hunting dog, or a competition dog.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, because I take a lot of stock in when I meet someone's dog. You're right. Sometimes you meet someone's dog, you're petting them, but they can almost take you or leave you. But then there's some of them that they don't even know you when they look you in the eyes. They kind of, you get smitten by them. Like,
Yes.
you almost go, oh my God, you love me like you love your owner, So what do you think about, I've had theories of it, and it's tailgate talk when we're out hunting and sitting in a bar. The dog that can look you in the eye, and not aggressively, and not like dopey, but like almost human like what? That, is there some stock in that in your world?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know, I can think back on some of the really great dogs I've been around, and they've had that human-like quality and that genuineness of, again, looking in the eye and having a respect and love and relationship with you that you certainly have to nurture with good and fair training techniques.
Yeah. Because I know there's the other dogs, and I've hunted with them, and I've owned a couple. They glance and look at you, but probably because they are still wolves technically, right? They could still breed with a wolf. Wolves by nature do not make eye contact, and they make quick gestures, looks, and the other one looks, like they have this pecking order. And so it's almost like we're looking for the alpha wolf that still looks you in the eye without a challenge, right? I'm a sucker for those eyes when they look at you.
But when you see wolves hunting, if you've seen stuff, there is a lot of similarities in their determination and intellect to our sporting dogs.
Yeah, to get that job done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, our dogs are working like they're dependent on the food, but they haven't been dependent on food in the wild for hundreds of years. But they're hunting like they're dependent on their next meal.
Like their life depends on it, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So, all right, jump back on the field trial a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be, I've seen, I worked out I joined, it was not a hunt club, it was a private piece of property that a Labrador guy used. I never watched anything happen there except him running his dog. He had dug a couple of ponds, small ponds, to do, I know you call them technical ponds, right?
Right. Yep.
The idea, do you start with, like, I keep thinking, like, you can't start with a big pond. So do you literally have to start going across little ponds, bigger, like, to keep that straightness in them? Because they do want to wander off and go to the closest bank sometimes, right?
Well, sure they do. Yeah. And that would be just like we would do. We're going to.
Right. That's because I can't swim, Pat.
We're always, you're looking for an easier route. You're taking the sidewalk instead of walking through the brush.
Right.
So it's certainly a natural trait. You certainly start with little pieces of water and typically corners of ponds. And, you'll throw a little short retrieve. A lot of what people will do early on is we call it a traffic cop, where you have the dog sit down and you walk away from them, and you may pitch that bumper off just through the corner of the water, and you're between the dog and the bumper. When the dog races to go around, you stop them, you take them back, and then maybe you throw it in the water, and you teach them the only way they get to retrieve is go straight to it. And that's the early stages of kind of coaching them to go straight through the water versus running around the water. And it becomes way more sophisticated than that when you start building the types of ponds your friend, the gentleman you talked about, was building, because they become more technical and challenging in nature with multiple corners and points and things like that. But it starts with little basic retrieves where you teach them to go straight, but you do plenty of retrieves where it's not about going straight. It's just about swimming.
Okay.
You just go straight out in a piece of water, throwing it off a dock, where they go out and they get comfortable swimming. and they learn to like to swim, and they're not so if you started some of the disciplined water retrieves before a dog was comfortable with swimming, you would really deteriorate their attitude about the water, and that's the worst thing you could do.
Yeah, I never gave that any thought because of the water sequences that we do in the versatile testing. You just said something, it made like a light go in my head. I think people tend to do that too early before the dog is like, I don't want to say Mark Spitz, but where the dog is totally comfortable in the water, because dogs can get a little panicky. I've seen them get panicky, So it's kind of like you got a twofold. You're paying attention to how much they like the water to how much you ask of them in the water.
You bet. And I'll tell you a real interesting technique that a friend of mine, a really good trainer, used to do is they would go out in the water with the dog and they would throw a bumper up on land, and that dog would retrieve from the water. They would start in the water. They put a little pair of hip boots on, and then they throw it up on land, and the dog would, learn to. So some of the early retrieves weren't necessarily in the water. They started in the water, and now they would go out and take walks with them. And, a lot of times you take even that litter of puppies before they even go home, and you walk near a pond and they'll dabble in it. Sometimes they'll even swim, but most of the early exposure is just voluntary. I used to take, I started a lot of puppies over the years that turned out to be good dogs, and I'd take them and I'd go with a bobber and catch some bluegills and do a little fishing. And before you knew it, you flip the little bluegill in the shallows, and he's chasing it. Before you know it, they're sitting there waiting for the bobber to go down because they know and it becomes a game. And now they can't wait to jump in the water. That's the beginning of all that, just that desire to make it their playground more than their workspace.
Just as comfortable as the ground that their 4 feet are on, basically. Absolutely. Yeah.
And you got to watch that water temperature. People, we talk about what people tend to do is they tend to want to, they're anxious in the springtime, and you're in Michigan or in the north, and they try to expose them to the water when it's too cold. I know we hunt in those kinds of conditions, but we have a rule of thumb in our sport. We want a combined temperature of 120 degrees, air and water, before we'll do any water work that requires discipline, or they're in the water for any period of time. So the water needs to be 60 degrees and the air 60 degrees before we will, especially in their formative stages, before we will do a lot of water work. So, and that's pretty warm. And they're going to hunt. I know people say, oh, they hunt and much colder than that. Of course they do. But
that's when they're older, when they hunt.
Trying to form a good attitude. And even with older dogs, when you're doing some of these technical retrieves that aren't always just fun and games, we pay a lot of attention to the comfort level the dog has in the water because of the air and water temperature. So 120 degrees is our cutoff. So you think about that. And so that's one reason we go to South Georgia in the wintertime, so we can expose the dogs to the water in a water temperature that is suitable for them.
I thought it was just because you like grits. I thought
learned to like that too.
No, I remember somebody saying something about that one time, that I know we were working some dogs. Now they were older dogs, and it was up in a reservoir in the mountains in Virginia. And he's like, boy, them dogs don't mind that cold water. And I'm like, but it was an older dog. And he had some reference to what you're saying, but it wasn't exactly like 120 degrees, but he was a dog person. And he kind of said, he goes, I wouldn't even ask my dogs to go in that water.
Well, you're right. And you'll take a walk with them and they'll jump in and swim around. But
Sure.
when you start adding rules and discipline to it,
Right.
the worst thing you can do is develop a sour water attitude. And the easiest way to do that is expose them to too cold of water and uncomfortable conditions when there are other stress factors with discipline and things that go along with it. And it's hard to overcome that if you get off on the wrong foot.
And you may not even know you did it if you didn't know that. Yeah.
So, right.
Dog could have been, let's say he could have been, or she could have been a better dog in the water with a more careful water exposure and more thought put into the water and air temp. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I work with a lot of other retriever breeds. Nova Scotia duck tollers, poodles. I've had a number of those dogs come into some of my seminars and workshops, and some of those breeds just aren't as naturally good in the water. So you really have to be careful how you expose them and how you introduce them to some.
How long before, I know this is a loaded question, but approximately when do you know you got something that's going to be not the winner, but something that you could be like, I could compete with this dog? Are they a couple of years old, or do you know it's, I know you're smiling, but
No. I mean, there's, I'm going to tell you, I said the really good ones and the really bad ones are pretty easy.
oh, okay.
It's all the ones in the middle. And I had a very active clientele when I was really active in Michigan that, wanted to win and were willing to spend a lot of money to buy dogs. And so you had to evaluate talent pretty quickly. And it was important that you were right.
Yeah.
You look at the NFL draft, you look at how much difficulty they have evaluating a 22-year-old kid for professional sports. Now, this has a similarity to it, but I've learned to be patient and not jump to conclusions. Now, I look for character. I look for a degree of natural talent, marking, perseverance.
Mhm.
I've made mistakes and passed on some dogs and one of which I almost won a national with, a dog that I decided, he's not going to make it. So I cut him loose before he was a year old. A year and a half later, the dog came back in training with a different owner. I didn't even realize it was the same dog. And I said, well, this is a really good dog. And one of my clients were laughing and said, that's the dog you washed out a year ago. And I said, I washed this dog out. I couldn't have been more wrong. So this dog was a late bloomer, and I've seen a number of those. So he didn't show the incredible talent, but he was just kind of okay-ish.
Right.
He went on to finish 2 nationals and came up eyelash from winning a national. And what a crime that would have been. So I learned in my more mature years to just take your time. As long as they're they don't have an aggression issue, some real deal breakers, physical, kinds of things. If they have the desire to work and maybe they're lacking on maturity and talent, letting them develop. So I would say, our basics program starts at typically, a little bit over 6 months. But it's a 3 to 5 month system that teaches them the early. So you're getting in now to a dog that is 13, 14 months old. Right. At that stage, you've got a pretty good idea on their trainability factor.
Yeah.
You're doing a lot of field work. At that point, you've got a pretty good instinct on what you're working with. And I would say, it takes about 2 years from the start of training to get a dog to competing at an all age level now. And but I would say in the first year, 6 to 8 months, you get a pretty good idea what you're dealing with.
Yeah. You mentioned, I'm going to jump topics. You mentioned you worked with Arlie Reynolds up in Alaska.
Sure.
And I'll throw a little bio on. I think I interviewed him once about 8 years ago, but he was what would he be? A veterinarian researcher, nutritionist from Purina, right? I don't know all the titles he carried, but he worked with sled dogs up in Alaska.
Yes, sir.
A performance dog, if there was ever a performance dog. So, from your world of the field trials and the Labradors, what drove you up to Alaska to go and what did you learn from him, or what was the crux behind that?
So I was pretty much in the peak of my competing career, and it was our friends at Nestle Purina that I said, guys, I'm pretty good at training retrievers. I know how to compete them in field trials, but there's 2 things that I'm embarrassed how little I understand about, and that's nutrition, fueling our dogs, and conditioning. And I said, nutrition and conditioning. And I asked, I think it was Bob West at the time, and I asked Bob, I said, who is your best nutritionist? Put me in contact with him. Well, he gave me Arlie Reynolds' phone number, and I took a vacation in the summer and went up and met Arlie, and he's just a great guy. And he's a hunter and an outdoorsman. He grew up in Ithaca, New York, went to Cornell University, and his passion was running sled. When he left Cornell and proposed an opportunity with Nestle Purina to test performance dog food diets on the most intense canine athlete there is, sled dogs. He went there, and I sought Arlie out, and I got to spend some time with him. I went to a couple races with him, and I did that over the course of a number of years. And I had a life change. I sold my place in Michigan, and Arlie said, "You want to come up and take a break and work for me for time?" And I jumped on it, and I went up there, and and I walked away from it wondering if I knew less or more. But I did. My eyes were enlightened to how important, fueling and how complex it was of a great canine athlete, and what they looked like and what they were capable of and how to nurture them. And so we became great friends, and it was probably one of the greatest things I've done in my life.
Did you, I know this is a silly question, possibly, did you do any competing or some sledding, or did you just,
I was more of just a grunt. I mean, I
grew up throwing the birds and
I was the guy that threw birds. Now I was on the back of some, a lot of what they do in their early training season is on the back of ATVs. They, you would think of Fairbanks, Alaska, they get a lot of snow, but they really don't get very much snow, not as much as some places in Michigan. So until the snow is deep enough, a lot of their training is done on the back of ATVs. So I rode on the back of ATVs behind some of those dog teams, usually behind somebody more skilled than me guiding them. But I learned a lot about the mechanics of what it takes to teach these dogs to be sled dogs. And, when you think you sometimes put 16 or 18 dogs on a single line with 2 on each side, our Labradors couldn't do that. They'd be tangled up and wrapped up and fighting and doing all kinds of craziness. And then they'll pass another team face to face, shoulder to shoulder, go in different directions. So there's a tremendous amount of training, even though those dogs aren't sophisticatedly trained in the way I think of training. It was an incredible experience. And it just enlightened me once again to the heart and desire to dogs driven to perform what they were bred to do.
And the fact that he was up there for Nestle Purina, like, would they bring the dogs back and do blood work on them, or like
there was a lab right there on site. We did all of the drawing blood and studies right there. They were, testing different supplements, and, there was constant blood work. And, Arlie was affiliated and was a dean for a while at University of Alaska at Fairbanks in the veterinary school. So he had access to labs and everything to do all those studies in Alaska. And because he was we had 100 sled dogs there, but we also went to other camps, trying out different things that they're using today in their dog food diets, and it was easier for him than maybe Purina Labs to do it because of all the red tape and challenges that they had gone through. So Arlie was kind of the first line of studies to do things to use what had already been accepted in the world of these sled dogs to do Iditarod and all these kinds of distance and things, and bring that into a world of performance kibble and dry dog food diet. So it was super interesting, and just little things that they talked a lot about at the time we were there. Different things for gut health, and different things for cognitive skills, and just antioxidants to keep dogs healthy and injury prevention. And so that's a lot of the stuff we were doing. We would be testing. We'd be drawing blood to see how quickly their lactic acid would dissipate, because and all kinds of things that human athletes. Arlie had a way of testing their VO2 max, their efficiency and ability to use oxygen, and so it was just an incredible experience to watch that happen. And Arlie we would have discussions just like you and I are about things he was thinking about. He was dreaming about some things that became significant, and some that didn't.
So anything from like, boy, if we add more fish oil, or do we try moose meat? I mean, I'm sure it could go in that direction some night. Like, I wonder if we should do the VO2 max on a wolverine. Everybody knows a wolverine is, I can imagine this, the conversations and because with anything, you throw stuff at the wall and certain things stick, right? And that's what he was doing. I'm sure the diet's up there, but I mean, everybody's read or seen old movies of sled dogs, old black and whites, and they fed them. The fish was up there available, and I don't think anybody in the lower 48 thought about feeding their dogs fish back in the day, right? That wasn't a thing.
Oh, you bet. And when you say black and whites, when I was there in 2006, we went up to a camp about an hour north of Fairbanks, and I smelled fish odor, and I couldn't figure out what it was. They had a whole yard, half an acre, and there were whole salmon buried in this yard, under the snow, not buried in the dirt.
Yeah.
And they would shovel it out, take a whole salmon, take a hatchet, chop it up in quarters, and that's how they fed it. They fed whole salmon that they had, and they had a permit to in the I guess what river would that be? Is the big river that goes through the central part of Alaska. But they would have these fish wheels where they would, and you've all heard about chum or dog salmon. They're
Sure.
the lower quality salmon that they would use for canine food, and so they were doing that. And I think some people are probably still using that technique.
Yeah. That had to be what brought you back to the lower 48?
Well, I went 28 days in a row and never got above 30 below zero. And it's a land of extremes. Now, I was a retriever guy by heart. I mean, I loved it. I met some people, but I missed a lot of my friends. And I came back and went back to work for the guy that I started with, Mike Lardy, in Sumter, Wisconsin. And and that's, I guess, the desire to take some of the things I'd learned and go back to the part of the country that I grew up in. And I've spent 40 years going south in the winter, and I spent 1 year going north, and so there is a certain comfort level. But the world of retrievers were in my blood, and I loved my time with sled dogs. But I checked that off my list. I said, all right, check.
Now, you said the name Mike Lardy, and being a pointing dog guy, I don't know, unless you haven't been at it very long, maybe you're on your first dog. I know that name just from articles in the magazines years ago. And he was, well, I don't know whether he was the best or he was certainly a multi-time well-known. There was DVDs, and was he of the old school or the new school, or did he have his own school? Like
he's a new school. He took the techniques of Rex and refined them even more so. Some of those, Rex was a major in the Marine Corps. He was a old school, hard nosed kind of guy. He tough and with people, and had high standards with dogs. But Mike took it to a more thoughtful approach. Mike taught people how to train more sensitive dogs, and refined the technique that Rex started to the next level. And Mike, has won more national championships than any other professional ever. And I'm not sure that'll ever get beaten, even though everybody's trying. And so I was part of some of those, and I was competing against him for some of those. But Mike had taken it and he's such an intellectual guy and a thinker. And Mike's got a German wire hair right now. And that's his new passion. And he's running a German wire hair on blind retrieves, just like a Labrador. He used all the same techniques. And he's a guy you ought to interview, because I said, Mike, I want to do a class with you and what you've learned to train your German wire hair with what you've done from retrievers. It would be a good interview for you.
That'd be great. Yeah, that would be super. So you've got he's in your speed dial, or he's in your contacts on your phone?
Absolutely. Yeah. I talk to him on a somewhat regular basis, and he's always sending me little videos of him running the wire hair on something. He said, you can't believe what I'm doing now. And I think some of the guys he works with thinks he's nuts, but we thought he was nuts back in the day too, until he wasn't.
Where does he live at? What part of the country?
He lives about an hour north of Madison, Wisconsin, and in Marquette County, in the town of Montello, Wisconsin is actually the town.
Well, that leads me to when I was asking all of you people that you don't work for Purina, or have you worked for Purina? I can't remember.
Actually, when I worked for Arley, I indirectly worked for Purina for a
Purina.
period of time, but I
You've
wasn't
been associated with them.
in
you've
St.
been a-
Louis.
Yeah. And I asked you and a few other people how the series I'm looking at is trying to find the top tier breeders of every breed in the country and interview them and not get their secrets, but get their methodology. And everybody said Mary, what was her name? Yeah.
Mary Candlewood.
And she's up from that part of this. So is this all connected? This whole Mary Crowley? And it's all-
Mary, actually, the dog that Mike won 3 national championships with, that's the only Labrador in history to win 3 national open championships. Mary Holly owned a dog named Candlewood Tanks a Lot. Their name was Lottie. So Mary, and Mary's in just a little bit north of Madison, about 30 minutes from Mike. But when she was doing all of her breeding, she was right in a little neighborhood, right in downtown, not downtown Madison, but in a community right in Madison. And that's where she spent most of her time.
And that's where some of the best got their dogs from.
Absolutely. You look
Man.
up Candlewood, and that's a bloodline that shows up, across not just field trial Labradors, but even some bench Labradors and other things like that. Mary was a real student and is a student of breeding and how to mesh personalities. And when people had a question, that's the person people called.
Like they'd be like, I don't understand this. She would go, well, here's what I would tell you, right? And she would almost have the database from all that breeding and all that knowledge.
Absolutely. You'd show her pedigree and ask what pedigree would go well with that, and she could spit it out like a computer.
Wow. Well, then that's going to bring us to our little tour at Purina, where I got to meet you last week. We got to go to the Olin Farms and see the statue of King Buck. Now,
Yes, sir.
King Buck, he competed before you were in the world, and you and I were in the world. He was in the 50s, right? King Buck.
Yeah, and he died the year I was born. I read a little bit about his. I did a little more studying on his biography. So he died in 1962, the year I was born.
Gotcha. And he was probably competing in the year I was born, 1950. Well, maybe not 57. I think he won before that. Is that something in the Labrador world? Is that like, does anybody have that line anymore? Do you know of, or is that something that was just?
Well, you see them. You see King Buck and a number of the dogs in his pedigree. I saw some Highwood lines, Highwood, and I assumed that was a guy from Alaska named Roy McFall who won a national with a dog named Highwood. Well, Highwood Piper's Pacer, but there's some bloodlines in there that I recognize. You'd have to take those pedigrees back 2 or 3 more generations than you typically see when you look at them.
Right.
But you see King Buck and similar bloodlines in a lot of modern day Labradors. And
right.
And it's just like you think, could Babe Ruth compete today? Well, he was the best of the best at the time, or Wilt Chamberlain, or all those great athletes. I certainly think that with modern training technique, that dog would have been equally as fantastic as he was then.
And Babe Ruth, he would have been put on a little bit more exercise, but he probably would have probably still would have hit 700 home runs.
Right. Exactly. I mean, he had great eye-to-hand coordination. He had all of the skills to be a great athlete. And really, field trials are like the NFL Combine to me. They don't necessarily mimic hunting, but they take great training, great intelligence, great perseverance, incredible marking, things that it takes to make a great hunting dog or a great search and rescue dog or companion dog.
Yeah.
I was just at a place in Maine that they trained field trial competitions bred Labradors to be search and rescue dogs. They were featured in the Dogs of 9/11, and they use all those qualities that we use to compete to find people and save lives.
So you basically could take a litter mate from a future champion, and that litter might be a cadaver dog or search and rescue or water rescue or drugs. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's just, what you do with those great skills is up to us.
So how about the big myth, right? We get it in the pointing dog world, and I'm sure you get it in the Labrador world. The top competitors are not always the top hunters. I don't believe that. But I know some of them just don't have the opportunity. That person is really just working with dogs to get the performance and go on and compete. How many of the good ones that you've seen also did a phenomenal job out in the field? I would have to believe it's the natural, right? If you're
It is.
taking the only thing would be teaching them to leave from a boat, right? I mean, would that be the
Absolutely.
thing?
Absolutely. I mean, I encourage my clients when they could to hunt their dogs.
Mhm.
They would learn things and get skills that I couldn't teach them in normal training. So and most every one of the dogs that I worked with, when exposed and taught properly, were fabulous companion hunting dogs. And because
And that's
again,
almost probably a mental, not break for them. It's stimulus, but it's almost like they know that's what they were really meant to do, and it probably keeps them up mentally, just being able to hunt, with
absolutely. I
yeah,
mean, if they're getting trained 10 months a year on a rigorous schedule, they need a break, just
right.
like, and so that's a great break for them. And so, and some, there was a myth that they thought, oh, it's going to ruin your field trail dog. I couldn't disagree more. I think it absolutely enhances it. And well, did you see even in the article about King Buck where
Yeah.
John Olin would take him hunting and Cotton had to kind of get him cleaned up when he brought him back.
Right.
He
Yeah,
got
you
a
sent
little
me that
loose.
article. That was good. I should put that in the show notes somewhere or to my patrons. And I love the history stuff when you hear about here's a dog that the trainer wasn't about to take King Buck hunting, but John Olin said, I need a hunting dog, right?
Absolutely.
This dog's going hunting tomorrow. No, he's got drills to do. No, I'm taking him out of school and I'm going hunting,
Well, that is a wonderful story, and I'll tell you, I saw a couple videos from like I think it was the 1967 National or something like that, and the Nationals back in that day resemble modern day hunt tests. The distances, the technique, the handling style looked
Yeah.
a lot like what you see in a hunt test today. So that's where the game's evolved from,
Right.
and for a lot of great things that started that way. And I know field trialers could learn from better hunting dogs and even hunt test stuff. And I know hunt test people learn from the techniques of competitive field trialers.
Yeah. We all, what do they say? A high tide raises all the ships, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So going back down to Purina where we met, we met a couple of veterinarians, Dr. J. I can't, her first name rhymes with her last name.
Janelle Appel.
Janelle Appel. Yeah.
Either pronounced Apple or Appel, but she's a good friend. And
I learned so much from her just on examining your dogs from their feet to their tail.
wasn't it something?
And we had a demo dog on the second day. So everything we learned in the classroom, you had to envision it. And then we did it the next day out at Olin Farms, and she had a dog. And I feel like that much of a vet now. Like next time my buddy's dog comes back to the truck with a little limp, I'm gonna say, wait a minute. Let's just start with a little isolated exam. Let's isolate the forearm from I was just, when you meet someone like her, I don't mean you feel dumb, you feel inspired.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like, boy, I don't know nothing. How long have you been hanging out with her? She's a welcome.
A long time. I met her in Thomasville, Georgia. She came to the Snowbird Retriever Club banquet, and as a aspiring sports medicine specialist, and this was 15 years ago, and she started there, and I've known her ever since. My wife, Robin, is her trusty assistant in the wintertime and loves doing it. And she's the person holding the dog and walking him, and Janelle is examining him. So I've known Janelle a long time. She's got a big sports background. Her actual brother-in-law was head coach for the 49ers for a while. So she knows the world of high level athletics.
Yeah.
And sports medicine. and humans as aware of it, and she takes that over to our dogs, and she goes to our nationals and keeps. There's been a lot of national champions that she's treated throughout the national, for bangs and bruises, and kept them going, just like you'd see any team doctor at a Super Bowl or a high level event.
So that's her thing. She'll literally be at these high level trials, and she's like the medic, the on-call medic for.
Yeah, and she has a mobile clinic. I mean, her van has got a Whirlpool E-stem unit in it, and she travels across the country. And slides up the side, you can, and she does all kinds of therapeutic treatments right on site. Wow. And when she shows up, she doesn't have 5 minutes to herself, because it's just dog after dog she's treating, and even dogs that are just not even hurt. She's always looking for early diagnosis, just like what you saw.
I've been looking at all my dogs, and I was like, oh, is that back left leg a little, I've got to go to more stuff when she's given a talk, because it'll just sink in even more, and I can't thank, like, if I had one thank you from that whole weekend, it wasn't the Cardinals ball game, it was meeting Dr. Janelle. She, and when we talked about how you meet a dog and you just have a feeling about him, her passion when she's telling you something, it's just like a laser beams to you when she talks to you,
And she's as honest as the day is long, and she's fabulous. Right. And I've done a couple of Purina master classes. Purina sponsors a thing not unlike what we're doing right now, an hour-long webinars. And Janelle's done a couple of them, and you can take a look at them. They're on my website. I'll tell you a little bit about it if you're interested in it, and where you could, one of which was just about, one of them was just conditioning, leave no muscle behind was one of them. And the other one was an hour-long talk about the things you saw her talk about. So it's available. It's a free deal, and Purina sponsored it.
Wow. Yeah, it was just such an eye opener, and I think there's people that we could have probably had a 2-day seminar. I'm sure she would have been able to do it. When there was more questions asked to her, because we all had that dog that came out limping, the dog that favored its paw, but the next day I guess I'm going to turn it into a question. So early field trial, there was no real sports medicine vets back in the day, or maybe there was. There wasn't, was there? No. You were kind of on your own, like, oh boy, I got a hitch in the giddy up on this dog. And you really didn't know. You probably just gave it some Rimadyl and hope that it.
They didn't even have Rimadyl back then. I mean, you have a buffered aspirin. That's what we did originally.
Buffered aspirin. That was it.
Yeah. What you gave, and you hoped your veterinarian had enough interest in, trying to help diagnose stuff that you could identify it. And, back that day, the hip dysplasia was a big deal. And did you notice that John Olin was the initiator of OFA? Did you read that?
Yeah.
Orthopedic Foundation for Animals at University of Missouri at Columbia. So that hip dysplasia was a lot of the early lameness factors.
Right.
Stuff. But as our dogs have become more thoroughbred-like, more athletic, in some ways we've actually made them a little more fragile in the world of retrievers. And so we do.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, especially, and this is hypothetical, that same dog that has what it takes to go on to a high level could have been bought and sit at somebody's house and never had an injury because you never pushed them physically. But yeah, we do push our dogs physically, and they're not, even wolves take a break, right? They get something to eat and they take 4 or 5 days off, right? And what do we do with our dogs? Come on, we're going to go drill today. Right.
And if we waited for them to decide they had enough, they'd kill themselves. I mean, so we have to be their advocate. We have to use good judgment and protect them. And with the advice of like Dr. Janelle, she can help you, stay on the straight and narrow and keep them from getting hurt.
Yeah. Now, does she do any outside? I mean, not obviously for Purina, but does she do any open clinics throughout the year, or is it all connected to trials?
No, she does that, and she's certainly open to that. She's also available for hire as a consultant You know, you can schedule her on her website and get some advice. And you remember how she was teaching people how to video a dog gait,
Yeah.
so she could analyze it for you.
Yeah.
She can give you advice where to get some treatment, and she's dialed into most of the rehabilitation centers across the country.
Probably
So,
the most cutting edge, whatever the most cutting edge is stuff too, I would imagine. Yeah.
absolutely. So, you know, seeking out her for further information is really valuable. And, you know, I've been into the world of working on digital educational courses, and we're pushing Janelle to put one together for us to put one together, not unlike what you saw, to teach people how to be able to do that.
Right.
She's a wonderful speaker, and it's just going to take some time and dedication to do that. But, you know, hopefully we can continue to push the envelope of education.
Well, if we could just get our distances a little closer from state to state, I know I could help with that part, you
I
know?
you do, Ron.
It would be, I would feel like if I got involved with that, helping people through working with her and you and putting something out there that everybody in the dog world would gain from, because like everybody, every pet owner would gain from that kind of knowledge. We got to keep that spark to, I mean, if you get it figured out, just let me know. And I want to see it when it comes out. But if I can be a part of it, I'd love to be a part of it. It would be great.
Absolutely. Well, and we're, you know, our next Purina Masterclass, which is next Tuesday, we've got Connie Cleveland, who's one of the most fabulous obedience trainers in the country. She has a product called Obedience Road, and she's going to speak about early preparation for puppies and early obedience for all venues. And there's already been a huge following of a lot of non-competitive dog people. So the same thing for Janelle, but the Connie Cleveland thing is it spans, it's all dog breeds of all different walks. So
I signed up for that because I got the link to it, and I'm going to be traveling. I won't be able to put it on the intro because that intro won't come out for another week, but I will put it out to my email list and my patrons about that thing, that they could sign up. I'm sure, like anything, it's a Zoom type class, and you just listen, put your hand up if you have a question at the end. Yeah, I'm the, you know, like I said, not a Purina commercial, but I don't know any other company that's done what they do for us and the dogs.
they've sponsored this, and they've actually taken it to the next level to push it, just not out of retriever world, but across all dog stuff.
Right, because I mean, they feed everybody's dogs. They don't just feed your dogs and my dogs, you know.
Absolutely.
They even feed cats, I hear. I've heard that.
How about that stuff? We saw that stuff.
Right. Yeah, we got to go in the little testing plant where we got to see the it was like a small batch brewery or a small batch distillery. Yeah, we saw everything. We got to kind of peek behind the curtain at Purina. It was pretty cool.
Way cool. And I really I always had a great respect for him, but the culture, the way that people felt, and the original owner, which was, what was his name?
Danforth.
William Danforth, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was William Danforth.
He was an outdoorsman, and really his motivation really still is, you know, the mission statement for the whole organization. It's
right. He had like his 12 commandments of running a company. And I mean, how could he couldn't have got any of them wrong, because look at the company, you know.
Oh, and it started with him just wanting to fuel his hunting dog.
Right.
So, you know, it's what we do today.
You'd almost say it's like everything comes from behind the dog. Oh, what a plug that was. What a plug that was. Pat, now you said you're going to be up in Michigan in October.
Well, actually, I looked and I misspoke. I'm going to be there in September. I've only got one more venue, and unfortunately, I think it conflicts with something you've got going.
Oh yeah, if it's September, I'm going to pretty much be gone in September, unless it was like the very last. When is that?
It's like, let me look at my calendar real quick. I've got it right here. Here I am. Oh, I'll be in Central Michigan. Where it is. I will be there the 18th through the 21st.
Oh shoot.
4-day clinic. and I go there 3 times a year, and I'll be there next spring or first
Okay.
week of May. So if we don't hook up, I've got 2 groups that I go back multiple times a year, and one is in New York and one is in Michigan, and the New York group is my October group. So
Gotcha.
but I'd love to run into you and see you. I lived there for 20 plus years in Michigan. So I've got
Well,
a
then
lot of
we'll make it for May. I will come out there. I want to, what is that class that you're putting on? Basically, if you could describe it quick, what is it?
I do my seminars, workshops, scenarios are typically 10 to 12 dogs, equivalent number of handlers.
Mhm.
And I put on a 3 to 4 day training event, depending on what the focus of the dog's levels are.
Mhm.
And I, day one, I set up a couple field scenarios. I usually video the handlers and the dogs,
Mhm.
and then I make a plan for the succeeding days. And we go to different land areas, and they're either hunt test or field trial dogs. But I'm coaching people that don't have access to higher level mentors, and I do about 16, 17 of those a year
Wow.
from one end of the country to the other. And then I run a day school training program from October through April in South Georgia, where some of these people spend all winter there. Some people come for a week at a time. But rather than having a full kennel where I'm caring for 24 to 40 dogs, where I used to at one part of my life,
Right.
I teach people how to train their own dogs and teach them how to be better handlers.
Right.
And-
So they're bringing Muhammad to their mountain instead of you staying there in one spot, being basically him. Like the only way to get Pat Burns is to come here. Now you just can travel around and
Right. And I go, across the upper Midwest, and, I'll be in Vancouver and Anchorage next year, and Maine, and all over. Once my winter day school format breaks camp, the different clubs and organizations will hire me for 3 to 4 day events. And so it's something I love to do. And some people, there's handlers, and there's also an opportunity to come as an observer and watch for a day and learn a little bit about and ask questions. It's, rarely is it more than 20 people. Sometimes,
Right.
some of the bigger clubs have more, but usually it's under 20, and it's a very open, relaxed atmosphere. I usually am mic'd up and have a speaker system, and you can hear, and I answer any questions that people might have to the best of my ability.
Wow. Well, that's a great, your dad was right. He was right not to put you into insurance.
Well, some of the people skills that to be a good insurance agent I've had to utilize in my world, and my dad was one of those guys that you just like to hang around with, and you and I and him would have gotten along great because
Well, yeah, I can't say I would have followed in my dad's footsteps, but I'm glad you didn't follow in your dad's footsteps, because I know you've brought a lot to the world of dogs. And like I said, when I got to meet you, I was like, well, I got to get to know this guy. And I'm going to be dragging you in probably in hunting season. I'm going to be dragging you in I might just chase you down there in Georgia this winter.
come down and see us sometime. It's that's that format in the Thomasville, Georgia, which is big bird dog country. Actually, that's where it started.
Right.
World of Pointers. That's there's a lot of high level competitions and names down there. It is the largest concentration of training grounds for retrievers in North America. There's up to 50 properties developed for training in a 50-mile radius of Tallahassee, Thomasville. And it's really a spectacular, great part of the country that embraces the outdoor life. And so if you ever get a chance to come down, we certainly would welcome and
I can make that happen. I can make that happen, because if I'm going to be the guy who blabs his mouth all the time, 50 times a year about hunting dogs and training, I should know every piece of it. And you're going to help me. You're going to help me not become an expert, but at least learn the vernacular. So it's like,
Kevin's, right? The world of Kevin's Outdoors.
sure.
That's where it started, right there in Thomasville, Georgia, and his main store is right there. So at very least, you get to come down and handle some incredible shotguns. And
I like that. That's something us pointing dog guys that get a little snobby about, right? Waterfowl guys, I don't think they got like real fancy guns in the boat, but us bird dog guys, yeah, we like those fancy guns at town. Yeah.
You might even get invited upstairs to see the real guns, I guess, which I've heard about.
Well, maybe you can make a connection for me. I'm sure you know somebody down there.
Well, I'm sure I could inquire for you.
Well, when we get off here, I want to thank you for coming on. Tell everybody how the best way to get a hold of you if they want to get a seminar or be an adjunct to the seminar. What's the best way to get a hold of you, Pat?
My website is eliteretrievers.com. ELITE, the word retrievers, RETRIEVERS.com would take you to my website. And you can inquire through there, get a message to us. That's where you could view some of our free material, some of the Purina master classes, and the one that I'm going to be doing with Connie, the 2 I've done with Janelle. I've done 2 with Arlie, a number of good speakers. You can access free material through that website. I've also got a couple different learning platforms. We're relaunching what I call our Bomb-Proof Basics program. I put together a year and a half following 3 retrievers from soup to nuts, from start to finish, to a basics program.
Wow.
And it's 16 hours of video, and gets supported with monthly calls, coaching people how to put their own dogs through basics. And we're just about to open that up for registration as well. You can find out more about that through eliteretrievers.com or email us through the website if you wanted to know more about it.
All right, Pat, I can't thank you enough. I told you when I saw you, I said, you're going to have to jump on this show. And, dogs, to me, dogs are dogs. I don't really care about the breed. I find every stitch of it fascinating, but I am going to lean on you for a couple of contacts that we talked about, because to fill up 52 weeks of content, Mike Lardy and Arlie Reynolds, that would be good to put me back in touch with those guys. I would love it.
Be happy to do it, Rob.
All right. You have a good day. I will let you go, and we're going to talk soon. If not, see each other sooner.
Thank you, my friend. Be good.
All right. See you, Pat.